the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Tor Wennesland. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Security Council. Thank you for inviting me to address the Council on recent developments in Rafah, where the situation is becoming increasingly desperate and dangerous for the already besieged population. Regrettably, we face yet another proceed of further catastrophe in Gaza amid stalled talks between the parties to secure the release of all hostages held in Gaza and a ceasefire to provide much-needed relief to the civilian population. Just 2 weeks ago, negotiations were ongoing in Cairo with the support of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. However, these talks ended on 9 May without agreement. I urge the parties to redouble all efforts and return to the negotiating table immediately and in good faith. I reiterate the UN's full support for the tireless efforts by the mediators to achieve this goal, and we stand ready to support implementation of such a deal. If talks do not resume, I fear for the worst for the beleaguered and terrified civilians in Rafah, for the hostages held in unimaginable conditions for more than 225 days, and for an overstretched humanitarian operation that remains on the brink inside the Strip. Mr. President, my colleague from OCHA will brief in greater details on the dire humanitarian situation in and around Rafah momentarily, but allow me to highlight some critical observations from the ground. Since the first week of May, the security situation in Rafah is rapidly worsening as the IDF operations and military maneuvers in and around the city have intensified. On May 5, Hamas launched mortars and rockets at IDF soldiers massed on the Israeli side of Kerem Abu Salem, Kerem Shalom crossing, killing 4 IDF soldiers and wounding 10. IDF tanks shelling and series of airstrikes in Rafah killed at least 19 Palestinians on the same day, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. The following day, the IDF said that it would prepare to operate with extreme force against Hamas in eastern Rafah and ordered approximately 100,000 Palestinians to immediately evacuate to what is described as an, quote, expanded humanitarian area in Al-Mawasi, unquote. Since operations began, more than 800,000 people have been displaced from Rafah to Mawasi, Khan Yunis, and Deir Bala amid daily IDF airstrikes in Rafah, killing dozens of Palestinians. Hamas has continued to fire rockets indiscriminately from Gaza towards Israel. These events have had a significant impact on humanitarian operations and access. The so-called expanded humanitarian area in Al-Mawasi lacks adequate shelter, food, water, and sewage infrastructure, and crossings for the entry of humanitarian goods have already been directly affected. In the wake of the Hamas strike on 6 May, Israeli authorities closed Kerem Abu Salem, Kerem Shalom crossing for 3 days. The following day, the IDF said it had established an operational control in the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing and closed the crossing for the movement of goods and people. The Rafah crossing with Egypt remain closed. In addition, active hostilities and IDF operations continue to render nowhere safe in Gaza, including for humanitarian workers. Just last week, a staff member of the UN Department of Safety and Security from India died, and another staff member was seriously injured when the UN vehicle was struck as they traveled to the European hospital in Rafah Governorate. This brings to a total 193 UN staffers who have been killed in Gaza since the start of the hostilities. Humanitarian movements must be made safer. Mr. President, I'm deeply concerned that the current trajectory, including the possibility of a larger-scale operations, will further undermine efforts to scale up the entry of humanitarian goods and their safe distribution to desperate civilians. The opening of the Sikim or Erez West crossing in Gaza North, including for the entry of humanitarian relief items arriving via Ashdod and from Jordan, is a welcome development, as is the entry of the first time of humanitarian supplies through Cyprus via the US-built floating pier on 18 May. However, I reiterate that more aid is needed to meet the enormous scale of needs in Gaza, and there is no substitute for the full and increased operation of existing land crossings. The UN continued to engage with all concerned parties, including the Israeli authorities, to address these and other safety concerns, including an improved humanitarian notification system. Mr. President, the Secretary-General, alongside numerous international partners and concerned neighbors, including Egypt, have voiced serious objections to a military operation in the city of Rafah amid clear indications of its devastating consequences for the civilian population. Saving lives and addressing the critical needs in Rafah and Gaza more broadly must remain our immediate priority, and I reiterate the Secretary-General's call for a humanitarian ceasefire. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the risk that these immediate threats pose to the prospects for a resolution of this conflict and for the longer-term peace and stability in the region. I'm very concerned that the failure to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and a large-scale military operation in Rafah exacerbated the risk of escalating regional tensions. Since the start of hostilities on 7 October, I have engaged continuously in the region, including in Lebanon, to avert a wider spillover, and I, in support of the Secretary-General, will continue these efforts. I also reiterate that there can be no long-term solution in Gaza that is not fundamentally political. The new Palestinian government, with 8 ministers from Gaza, represent an important opportunity to support tangible steps toward unifying Gaza and the occupied West Bank politically, economically, and administratively. The international community should provide support to the new government to address its fiscal challenges, strengthen its governance capacity, and prepare it to reassume its responsibility in Gaza and, ultimately, govern the whole of the occupied Palestinian territory. The Palestinian Authority must also be an integral part of planning for Gaza recovery and construction. The devastation and misery of the past 7 months have reinforced a simple truth. Palestinians and Israelis can no longer wait to establish a viable political horizon to end the conflict and establish a two-state solution. Day after day, we are witnessing the deadly consequences of inaction. Now is the time to lay the foundations for a better future for Palestinians, Israelis, and the broader region. The UN will continue to support all such efforts. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Wennesland